And the former FBI director will be arraigned on federal charges next month. James Comey was indicted on a count of making false statements and another count of obstruction of justice in connection with testimony he gave to Senate lawmakers back in 2020. Before the indictment was announced, President Trump said this about Comey in the Oval Office yesterday.
Comey's a bad person. He's a sick person. I think he's a sick guy, actually. He did terrible things at the FBI. But I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen.
CBS News Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us from Washington with the latest on this. Scott, we heard the president there say that Comey is bad, he's sick, but why specifically is the Justice Department charging Comey with obstruction and other offenses?
Oh, this case is a unicorn, Errol. It bears no resemblance to something we've seen before. The president declaratively urging a prosecution of a political opponent, appointing a U.S. attorney who was once a White House aide to go ahead and file that case, and James Comey, the former top cop in America, now a criminal defendant. The allegations here are that Comey made a false statement while testifying in Congress nearly 5 years ago, and that there was an obstruction in the process. This exchange stands out from Comey's testimony in September 2020 with Senator Ted Cruz.
What Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
James Comey has proclaimed his innocence in a video last night and says he looks forward to the trial. A couple things to unpack here. First of all, the arraignment's going to be October 9th. He'll face the judge at that point. It's at the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. But everything about this is just different, Errol. The acting U.S. attorney, Lindsay Halligan, a one-time Trump aide, was the only person to sign the charging document. That is untraditional. She was the one making this case through her office to the grand jury. And at this point, no others have put their names on this inside this massive U.S. attorney's office in Virginia. And we do know, Errol, there was one resignation last night over this case. A senior assistant U.S. attorney had been there a while, walked off the job.
And so what does all of that tell us, Scott? That you call it a unicorn, it's untraditional, someone has resigned over this. We know that the hearing, the arraignment comes next month, but what damage could this create?
To be clear, this is a pretty small case compared to other federal cases. The sentencing guidelines, if there was a conviction, would be potentially weeks or months in prison, if there's any prison at all. This is a case so small, the feds tend not to bring this type of case. But this case is enormous in a different sense. It is setting the stage for a potential shattering of norms, of the independence of the U.S. Department of Justice from political considerations inside an administration. And the question being asked is not just what happens with James Comey next, but who is next among Trump's opponents in the federal courts.
Yeah, we'll continue this thread right now. Scott MacFarlane, thank you very much. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now with more on all of this. Ed, good morning to you. A lot of folks just waking up to this news, but it is a major escalation in the president's, I guess what you could call retribution campaign against his political foes. What might this mean for his power over the DOJ if this doesn't go his way?
Well, I mean, it's certainly going his way so far because he's been able to install people who saw through this indictment. As Scott was saying, Lindsay Halligan's only been on the job a handful of days, had never done something like this before in her legal career, and managed to get an indictment from a grand jury over in Northern Virginia. We'll see if the details of that ever do come out, of how she did it and what exactly was argued. But the fact that Comey wants to go to trial and made that very clear in his statement last night is going to really test the legal arguments now that the Justice Department will have to make, because it is ultimately a legal department. It is one that has to go to court and explain itself and seek charges and seek seek justice. But whether they have the actual information and the stuff to do that remains to be seen, and that will ultimately frustrate the president. It's one thing to tie up your political opponents in these kinds of years-long, multi-million-dollar defense arrangements that have to be set. And Comey now faces it. John Bolton, his former national security advisor, may soon face it. The senator from California, Adam Schiff, may face it one day. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General. And that's part of what he's just trying to do, squeeze people, give them financial and personal pain, not necessarily ultimately something that ends up in jail, though if that were to happen, he'd be thrilled with it. And so we'll see. But if professional prosecutors like the one Scott said are stepping away from this because they disagree with the tactics here, at some point it just erodes the Justice Department to a point where it may be inoperable or certainly not able to hold up cases in court.
That's such an interesting point you make, Ed. There is a massive financial cost to defending yourself against these types of